10 tribes of Israel disappeared in a single night. 27,290 people, chained, ripped from their land, dragged 900 miles north, and no one ever saw them again. That is what you were taught, and it is a lie. A stone carved 2,748 years ago, sitting today in a museum in London, proves that those people did not vanish. They were deposited with names and exact coordinates in 4 specific places. And before this video ends, you are going to know where their descendants live today, on 4 continents, with genetic markers that science has confirmed over the last 20 years. But this is only the beginning, because there is a Hebrew word the Bible uses to describe what happened to those tribes, and that word never meant lost. It meant something far more astonishing, something that changes the way you read half the Bible. If you are wondering whether this is worth your time, let me tell you something. The inscription I am going to show you is catalogued in the British Museum under registration number 11894. And it says, word for word, what the Bible wrote 800 years before. That means every prophecy that comes after is also literal, and every prophecy speaks of a return. Before we keep going, one quick thing. If this channel is teaching you something no one else ever did, leave your like right now. The like is what tells the algorithm that this video needs to reach other believers. And if you are new here, stay to the end, because at the end, I'm going to tell you something that connects all of this to a medieval traveler who reached the exact place where the tribes were deported and found survivors 800 years later. Let us start with a fact that breaks almost every sermon on the subject. The Bible never uses the word lost to talk about the 10 tribes, not even once. That word was invented by Greek and Latin translators centuries after the exile. What the Bible actually says, word for word, are 3 completely different Hebrew terms, galut, nidak, and pizur. And in a moment I will explain each one. Because when you understand the Hebrew, you understand that what happened was not a loss. It was a planting. Let us go to the beginning of the problem. Solomon dies around the year 930 before Christ, and his kingdom splits in 2. His son Rehoboam takes the throne. The tribes of the north ask him to lighten the heavy taxes his father had placed on them. Rehoboam consults the elders, who tell him to give in. Then he consults the young men, who tell him to crush, and Rehoboam chooses to crush. 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 14. Rehoboam answers them, "My father loaded you with a heavy yoke, but I will add to your yoke. My father chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scorpions." Scorpions. That Hebrew word akrabim refers to whips with metal barbs on the tip. It was a declaration of war disguised as a political answer. The 10 northern tribes left. They chose Jeroboam as their king. And the northern kingdom was born, with its capital first in Shechem, then in Tirzah, finally in Samaria. In the south, only 2 tribes remained, Judah and Benjamin, with the priestly tribe of Levi scattered between them. Capital in Jerusalem. What happened next was the countdown. 200 years of separate kingdoms, 200 years of parallel kings in the north who drifted further and further from the God of their fathers. Jeroboam set up 2 golden calves, one in Dan and one in Bethel, so the people would not have to travel to Jerusalem to worship. 1 Kings 12, verse 28. And from that day, prophet after prophet arrived in the north warning of what was coming. Elijah came, Elisha came, Amos came, Hosea came, 4 major prophets speaking almost exclusively to the northern kingdom. And the northern kingdom did not listen. Look at this, because almost no one tells you this. Amos was a poor farmer from Tekoa in the south, and God sends him to preach in Bethel at the heart of the northern kingdom. Amos chapter 5 verse 27 says something chilling. "I will cause you to go into captivity beyond Damascus." Beyond Damascus. He is naming the exact direction of the exile, 50 years before it happens. God was giving the coordinate before the event. And Hosea is even more striking. His entire book is an allegory of the spiritual adultery of the northern kingdom. God orders him to marry a prostitute, Gomer, as a living illustration. And the names he gives his children are a prophetic sentence: Jezreel, which means God will scatter; Lo Ruhama, not pitied; Lo Ami, not my people. Every time Hosea called his son to dinner, he was prophesying the fate of the northern kingdom. All of that happened 750 years before Christ, 30 years before the fall of Samaria. The warnings were there, and nobody listened. And then the empire that changed everything appeared: Assyria. If you are listening to this while driving, while cooking, while working, do not stop. Just pay attention to this name, Tiglath-Pileser III. Because that Assyrian king is the one who starts the countdown to the end of the northern kingdom, year 745 before Christ. Tiglath-Pileser III takes the throne of Assyria through a palace coup. And from day one, he has a military doctrine different from every king before him. The Assyrians were always brutal, but Tiglath-Pileser invents something new, a technique that the Babylonians, the Persians, the Romans, the Soviets would later use. Mass deportation as a tool of imperial control. Before him, empires conquered, plundered, took tribute, and left. Tiglath-Pileser does something worse. He conquers, rips entire peoples from their lands, transports them thousands of miles, mixes them with other deported populations, and breaks their identity. No land, no common language, no priests, no temple. A nation without memory. And that is exactly what he did to the northern kingdom. 2 Kings chapter 15 verse 29 says it with names. I'm going to read it slowly. In the days of Pekah, king of Israel, came Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, and took Ijon, and Abel-Beth-Maachah, and Janoah, and Kadesh, and Hazor, and Gilead, and Galilee, all the land of Naphtali, and carried them captive to Assyria. All of Galilee, the land of Naphtali, the region where 8 centuries later Jesus would walk preaching the kingdom. That same land was emptied of its original people in a first deportation that almost nobody mentions, year 732 before Christ. That was only the first wave. The final one came 10 years later, year 722 before Christ. The northern kingdom is ruled by a man named Hoshea, the last king of Israel, no relation to the prophet of the same name. And Hoshea makes the fatal mistake. He conspires with Pharaoh So of Egypt to free himself from Assyrian tribute. 2 Kings 17 verse 4. The Assyrian king discovers the betrayal, and he sends the army against Samaria. The siege lasts 3 years. Wait, 3 years. That is not a number that passes quickly. It is an eternity. It is a baby born inside the walls who learns to walk before ever seeing the sun outside the city. It is a bride who marries in the middle of a famine and buries her husband before her first anniversary. The archaeological excavations of the 1930s, led by John Crowfoot and Kathleen Kenyon on the Mount of Samaria, uncovered layers of ash, human bones unburied in the streets, empty cisterns sealed with mud as a last resort to save rainwater. The houses carry marks of hand-to-hand combat. Parallel Assyrian inscriptions from other besieged cities of the same era describe cannibalism in the final months of the siege. And through all of this, the prophets kept speaking. Hosea, already old, shouting in the squares while the Assyrian army surrounded the city. Hosea 4 verse 6, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge." But no one was listening anymore. The people were eating boiled leather and burying their children in silence. When the city finally fell, the Assyrian king who finished the job was Sargon II. And here comes something that almost no channel explains, because almost nobody knows it. But before I show you the stone that changes everything, look at how Assyrian deportation worked, because it was not just they were taken away. It was a system designed to destroy identities. The Assyrian records found in Nineveh and Nimrud describe the exact procedure. First, the army separated the families. Adult men in military columns, chained 3 by 3 with metal rings around the neck. Women with small children in carts pulled by oxen. The elderly and the sick were left on the road, simply abandoned or executed. The priests and religious leaders were executed first, in public, to break the spiritual backbone of the people. Then came the march. 900 miles from Samaria to Hala, crossing the Syrian desert under the summer sun. No shade, with rations of raw barley and measured water. Modern studies by the historian Bustane Oded, in his classic work on the deportations of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, published in 1979, document that mortality during these journeys was extremely high. Of every column of deportees, a significant portion never reached the destination. When they arrived at the destination, the worst part came. The Assyrians did not allow the deportees to settle in a single region. They split them into small groups. No more than 50 families per village, mixed with other deported populations. Arameans, Phoenicians, Eurasians, Medes. The idea was simple. If no one had neighbors from the same origin, in one generation, no one would speak the same language. In 2 generations, no one would remember the same God. It was engineering of identity, and it almost worked. Now the inscription. Year 1842. The French archaeologists Paul-Émile Botta and Eugène Flandin unearthed the walls of the Palace of Sargon at Dur-Sharrukin, modern-day Khorsabad in northern Iraq. And on those walls, they read a cuneiform inscription that changes everything. It sits today in parts in the British Museum, the Louvre, and the Museum of Baghdad, and it says, word for word, I besieged and conquered Samaria. I deported 27,290 of its inhabitants. 27,290. Sargon II wrote it in stone with his own name. Archaeology confirming line by line what 2 Kings 17 verse 6 says. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria took Samaria and carried Israel away into Assyria and placed them in Hala and in Habor, by the river of Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes. And notice something. 27,290 is not the total of Israelites deported. It is only the specific number Sargon credited to himself, mostly from the final wave and from Samaria itself. But the deportations had begun 10 years earlier with Tiglath-Pileser and continued for decades. Modern studies estimate that between the different waves, the total population deported from the Northern Kingdom was approximately 200,000 people, possibly more. An entire nation ripped from the map. Stop there. 4 exact coordinates in the biblical text. Hala, Habor, the river of Gozan, and the cities of the Medes. Where are those places today? Hala corresponds to a region north of Mesopotamia, in modern-day northern Iraq, near Mosul. Habor is a tributary of the Euphrates, in modern-day northeastern Syria. The river of Gozan is the modern-day Kabul, which still exists, still runs, still carries that name in Arabic. The cities of the Medes are the mountains of western Iran, around Hamadan, a city that still exists with that same name. That is to say, the Bible is giving you a map: northern Iraq, northeastern Syria, western Iran. There is a detail few people connect. Hamadan is the ancient Ecbatana, one of the capitals of the Median Empire and later the Persian Empire. In the book of Esther chapter 2, when Mordecai and Queen Esther appear at the Persian court, they are living in Susa. But the descendants of the deported tribes had been living in that region for nearly 200 years when the Persians took power. Mordecai was from the tribe of Benjamin and a descendant of captives. The plot of Esther takes place exactly in the heart of the territory where the exiles from the northern kingdom were deposited. Esther never fully makes sense unless you connect it to the deportation of 200 years before, northern Iraq, northeastern Syria, western Iran. If you draw a circle around those regions on a modern map, you will find a familiar name: Kurdistan. The land where today between 30 and 40 million Kurds live. I'm not saying the Kurds are the 10 tribes. I'm saying that when you read the biblical verse with a modern map next to it, you discover that the Bible does not say they got lost. It says exactly where they went. To a specific region that exists today with the same name as the river the text mentions. Think about this for a second. Imagine a child born in a Kurdish village 100 years ago in the mountains near the Kabur River. He grows up herding sheep. He speaks a local dialect. He prays 5 times a day because he is Muslim. But his grandmother at night sings him songs in a language he does not fully understand, with words like Shalom and Yahweh that the family preserves but no longer knows how to explain. That child could carry in his blood the DNA of an Israelite priest deported by Sargon II, and no one in the world, not even himself, would know it. His biblical identity is diluted in 28 centuries of marriages, conversions, migrations. But it is there, in his bones, in his mitochondria, in the songs of his grandmother. Multiply that child by millions. Imagine entire families like that, in remote villages, in forgotten valleys, in inaccessible mountains, not lost, just scattered. Just waiting for the promise of God to bring them to light when the time comes. And here is the question no one has asked you. If the Bible says so clearly where they went, why does official history call them lost? 3 answers, each one darker than the last. First, the Assyrians erased identity on purpose. It was not an accident, it was imperial policy. 2 Kings 17 verse 24 says it clearly. The king of Assyria took out the Israelites and brought other peoples into their place, people from Babylon, from Cuthah, from Ava, from Hamath, and from Sepharvaim. These new people, after generations, mix with the few Israelites who remained in the land and produce the group that the Bible and the Gospels will later call, by a name you know. The Samaritans. Yes. The same Samaritans of the Gospel of John chapter 4, the woman at the well, the same ones the Jews of the time of Jesus despised because they considered them an impure mixture. That mixture is born here in 722 before Christ, and it exists to this day. Fewer than 800 Samaritans remain in Israel today, living on Mount Gerizim with their own version of the Torah, their own temple. They are the descendants of the Assyrian mixture. Second reason, the Hebrew prophets prophesied the dispersion before it happened, and the dispersion was never presented as an ending, but as a seed. Deuteronomy 4 verse 27. Moses, 8 centuries before the fall of Samaria, says this, "And the Lord shall scatter you among the peoples, and you shall be left few in number among the nations to which the Lord shall lead you." Catch the verb, shall scatter you, in Hebrew vehefits, the same root as the Greek word diaspora later. Moses is predicting, in the middle of the Sinai desert, that the people will be dispersed, not lost. Dispersed, scattered like seeds in the wind. And seeds are not lost, they fall on other soil and they germinate. The most striking prophecy comes from Hosea, chapter 1, verse 10. After announcing the destruction of the northern kingdom, God tells the prophet, "Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be like the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured nor counted." If that promise is fulfilled, somewhere on the planet today, there must be descendants in proportions impossible to count. Third reason, and this one gets political. Official history, especially in medieval Europe, preferred to say that the tribes had been lost because that theologically justified the European Jews as the only heirs of the covenant. If the 10 tribes were still existing somewhere, that complicated the narrative. But if they had been lost, then only Judah and Benjamin, ancestors of modern Jews, were the legitimate receivers of the messianic promises. The truth does not fit that narrative. Now pay attention, because here comes the block almost no one studies. The Bible uses 3 Hebrew words to describe what happened, and each one means something different. Galut, root gala. It means to go into exile, to be revealed, to be uncovered. Same root for revelation and exile, as if God were saying that when a people goes into exile, something is revealed. Identity is laid bare. True faith is separated from false. Nidak, root nadak. It means to be pushed, to be expelled. It appears in Deuteronomy 30 verse 4, where Moses says, "If your outcasts are in the uttermost parts of the heavens, from there the Lord your God will gather you." The Hebrew word is nidachecha, your pushed ones, not your lost ones. Your pushed ones, something lost, no one knows where it is. Something pushed has a direction, pizur, root pazar. It means to scatter like seeds. It appears in Esther 3 verse 8, where Haman tells the Persian king, "There is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom, scattered like grain in the wind, that later germinates wherever it falls." Galut, nidach, pizur, exile that reveals, push with direction, seed that germinates, and not once does the Bible use a word that means lost or vanished. Modern translations hid that. Medieval rabbis knew it, but did not teach it, and the Western Church simply forgot. There is something else you have to see. When Jacob was dying in Genesis 49, he called his 12 sons and prophesied over each one the destiny of his descendants. And if you read that prophecy carefully, you discover that what would happen more than 1,200 years later was already announced. Reuben, the firstborn, receives a curse for his sin with his father's concubine. Unstable as water, you shall not have preeminence. That instability is not disappearance, it is dispersion. His descendants will never have a strong tribal identity. They dilute among the others. Simeon and Levi receive a joint sentence for the massacre at Shechem in Genesis 34. "I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel." Scatter, the same Hebrew root that appears later in Deuteronomy. Simeon dilutes, absorbed by Judah until it almost disappears as an identifiable tribe. Levi is distributed among all the tribes as priests with no land of their own. Zebulun receives a maritime blessing. Zebulun shall dwell at the haven of the sea, and he shall be for a haven of ships, exact geography, a tribe of sailors and merchants. And archaeology has found evidence of Israelite traders in Mediterranean ports, including remains in places as far away as Tartessos in Spain, Carthage in North Africa, and according to some researchers, even southern India and Yemen. Dan receives an almost unsettling image. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, a viper by the path. Some ancient rabbis interpreted that as a sign that the tribe of Dan would end up associated with rapid and unpredictable migrations. Look at what few notice. Dan does not appear in the list of sealed tribes in Revelation 7. The 12 tribes are listed, but Dan is replaced by Manasseh. Dan literally disappears from the official lists of the New Testament. But the traditions of the Beta Israel Ethiopians and of some peoples of the Caucasus claim direct descent from Dan. Asher, Naphtali, Gad. Each one receives a prophetic word. And when you put them all together, you see a pattern. The prophecy of Jacob already predicted that the tribes would scatter in different directions. Sailors to the south, warriors to the east, shepherds to the north, traders along the coasts. It was not an accident. It was designed from the very first Genesis. Imagine an Israelite mother in Samaria, year 722. Assyrian soldiers enter her home. They take her husband, chain him, place him in a column that will march 900 miles north. Her and her children they put on carts with other families. 3 years of marching, some die of thirst, others of disease. Those who arrive alive in Haber are distributed among Assyrian villages. Her grandson, 30 years later, already speaks Aramaic as his mother tongue. Her great-grandson marries a Median woman. Her great-great-grandson worships other gods. The Israelite blood stays in his veins. But the name, the faith, the identity, all of that dilutes. That is not loss, that is dilution, and dilution leaves traces. And here is where the subject stops being ancient theology and becomes modern investigation. Because in the last 50 years, several ethnic groups on 4 continents have been studied by geneticists, anthropologists, and rabbis. 4 peoples with traditions, cultural evidence, and in some cases even genetic markers, pointing to a Hebrew origin. Let us start with the first, the Pashtuns of Afghanistan and Pakistan, 40 million people, strict Sunni Muslims, and at the same time an oral tradition that calls itself Bani Israel, literally children of Israel. They have clans with Hebrew names. There is a clan called Yusufzai, which in Pashto means sons of Joseph. Another called Afridi, which some researchers connect to the word Ephraim. Their oral tradition says that at some point in ancient history, they were expelled from their original land to the west and migrated east, crossing Persia until they settled in the Afghan mountains. There is a book from the 17th century, written by an official in the court of the Mughal Emperor Jahangir, called Makhzan-e-Afghani. That book extensively documents Pashtun genealogies that go back to King Saul, the first king of Israel. And there is more. The Pashtuns have a code of honor called Pashtunwali. That code includes 9 principles, and 7 of them match laws from Leviticus and Deuteronomy. Refuge for the stranger, Nanawatai, is similar to the biblical concept of the cities of refuge in Numbers 35. Blood vengeance, Badal, reflects Deuteronomy 19. Respect for the guest, Melmastia, is Leviticus 19, verse 34. The Pashtuns circumcise their sons on the 8th day, not on the 10th as other Muslim peoples do. They light lamps on Friday evenings. Some clans have ancient prohibitions on mixing meat with milk in ritual settings. Is this definitive scientific proof? No. Is it coincidence? Impossible. And there is more. Years ago, teams of Israeli researchers have done preliminary DNA studies on some Pashtun clans. The complete results were never published in definitive form, in part due to the difficulties of access to Afghanistan because of the war, but preliminary investigations leaked in academic circles suggest ancient Semitic markers in unexpected proportions in certain specific clans. The formal research remains on hold, waiting for a political context that allows broader studies. Meanwhile, in Israel there is an organization called Amishav, founded by Rabbi Eliyahu Avichail, dedicated to investigating candidates for lost tribes. Avichail traveled 3 times to Afghanistan before the year 2001, interviewed Pashtun elders in remote villages, and came back convinced that the connection is real. His diaries, published in Hebrew, describe elders who recited tribal genealogies with ancient biblical names that no ordinary Muslim knows, second people. The Bnei Menashe of northeastern India, 10,000 people who live in the states of Manipur and Mizoram, on the border with Burma. Before the 20th century, they were headhunters, animists. They lived in villages in the mountains. But they preserved ancient ritual songs, transmitted orally, that spoke of an exodus from the west, of a sea that divided, of a leader called Mosi who opened the waters. When British missionaries arrived in the 19th century and taught them the Old Testament, the Bnei Menashe were in shock. The biblical stories matched their ancestral songs. They began to study Judaism. In the year 2005, the chief Sephardic rabbi of Israel, after visiting the community and studying their traditions, officially declared them descendants of the tribe of Manasseh. Since then, more than 4,500 Bnei Menashe have migrated to Israel, third people. And this is where it gets genetic, the Lemba of Southern Africa. They live in Zimbabwe and South Africa. 100,000 people. They practice circumcision, rest on the Sabbath, do not eat pork, and have a hereditary priestly class they call Buba. And when a group of geneticists, led by Professor Tudor Parfitt of the University of London, analyzed the Y chromosome of Lemba men in the late 1990s, they found something extraordinary. The presence of the genetic marker known as the Cohen modal haplotype in significant proportions, and especially in one of their clans, the Buba, considered priests. The frequency of the marker was similar to that of the Kohanim Jews of the Middle East. The Cohen marker is a specific genetic pattern associated with the descendants of Aaron, brother of Moses, the priestly line of Israel. It is not theory. It is DNA. Published in peer-reviewed scientific journals, the Lemba have ancient Semitic blood, genetically proven. The question is not whether they have Jewish origin. The question is by what path they reached southern Africa. Lemba oral tradition answers that question. Their elders say they came from a place called Sina to the north. Researchers identify Sina as an ancient city in Yemen, in the region of the Wadi Hadramaut, where Jewish populations existed in antiquity. They migrated by the Red Sea, crossed into Africa, and went down the east coast until they settled in their current territory. The Lemba preserve prayers in archaic Hebrew, kosher funerary practices, and a strict prohibition against marrying outside the clan, exactly like the Israelite purity laws of the Pentateuch. Fourth people, the Beta Israel, the Ethiopian Jews. Here there is no theory. There is official recognition. They lived isolated in the mountains of Ethiopia for more than 2,000 years. They kept an archaic version of Judaism with no Talmud, no oral rabbinic tradition, only with the written Torah. And the story of how Israel rescued them is like something out of a film. Year 1984. Ethiopia suffers a devastating famine. Thousands of Beta Israel are trapped in refugee camps in Sudan. The Israeli government, in cooperation with the CIA and Sudanese intelligence services, organizes a clandestine airlift. The operation was called Moses. Cargo planes took off at night from an improvised landing strip in the Sudanese desert. In 47 flights, they got more than 8,000 Ethiopian Jews out and brought them to Israel. The operation became public almost by accident and was interrupted halfway through, leaving thousands of families behind. 7 years later came Operation Solomon. Year 1991. Ethiopian communist regime falling. 34 flights in 36 hours, 14,325 Beta Israel taken out of Addis Ababa and flown directly to Tel Aviv. A woman gave birth inside the plane halfway through the flight. The baby was born being, literally, the first Ethiopian Jew to enter Israel after almost 3,000 years. Those operations were not just migration, they were the literal fulfillment of a prophecy. Isaiah 11 verse 11 says, "And it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people which shall be left, from Assyria and from Egypt and from Pathros and from Cush and from Elam and from Shinar and from Hamath and from the islands of the sea." Read the word Cush, ancient Ethiopia, specific by name. And 2,700 years later, Israeli planes were taking off from Addis Ababa with entire families of Beta Israel on board. What for the pilots was a military operation, for the Hebrew prophets was an announcement being fulfilled in real time. And there is one more detail about the Beta Israel that few know. There is archaeological evidence in northern Ethiopia, in a region called Aksum, of ancient temples oriented toward Jerusalem. Inscriptions in an ancient Semitic language, Ge'ez, which shares roots with Hebrew. And Ethiopian tradition claims that the Ark of the Covenant was brought to Aksum by a son of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. That tradition is documented in the Kebra Nagast, a 14th century Ethiopian text that collects much older traditions. Whether the Ark part is true or not, the important detail is that ancient Ethiopian culture was in deep and constant contact with Israel long before the Christian era. And Acts chapter 8, verse 27 gives a clue. Philip the evangelist meets an Ethiopian eunuch returning from worshipping in Jerusalem, an important official of Queen Candace, reading Isaiah in his chariot. Why was an Ethiopian in the 1st century making pilgrimage to Jerusalem? Because there already existed a religious connection between Ethiopia and the people of Israel centuries before Christ. 4 peoples, 4 continents, and before you think this might be exaggeration, let me confront something important. In the late 18th century and during the 19th in England and later in the United States, a current emerged called British Israelism. This current claims that the 10 tribes are the modern Anglo-Saxon peoples, that the British descend from Ephraim, the Americans from Manasseh, the Nordics from Dan. I have to tell you honestly, there is no biblical, historical, or genetic basis for that theory. It is a 19th century nationalist construction designed to justify British imperialism. Modern DNA studies show no significant Semitic connection between the Anglo-Saxons and the Middle East. The Celtic, Germanic, Scandinavian migrations are well documented and do not pass through Mesopotamia. I tell you, because when you start studying this subject, you will run into those ideas, and I prefer you discard them from here. The tribes did not go to England. They went to the places the Bible mentions: northern Mesopotamia, Persia, mountains of the Medes. And from there, by the trade routes, they scattered to India, Afghanistan, Africa, and other places. The historical reality is more astonishing than any invented theory, but there is something even more important, something no archaeologist and no geneticist can measure, and that is the prophetic dimension. The scriptures do not only say where the tribes went, they also say where they are going to return. Isaiah 11 verse 11 again, now in full. And it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again the 2nd time to recover the remnant of his people which shall be left, from Assyria, and from Egypt, and from Pathros, and from Cush, and from Elam, and from Shinar, and from Hamath, and from the islands of the sea. Coordinates again. The promise is not vague. God names 7 specific regions. And the next verse, the 12th, confirms it, and he shall set up an ensign for the nations, and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the 4 corners of the earth. Look at the difference. The outcasts of Israel and the dispersed of Judah. Israel and Judah named separately, that is, the 10 of the north and the 2 of the south, recognized as different groups, but gathered by the same God. That prophecy was not fulfilled in the return from Babylon in the year 538 before Christ, because in that return only Judah, Benjamin, and part of Levi came back. The 10 of the north did not appear. So the fulfillment is still pending. And here Ezekiel comes in, the most striking prophet on this subject, Ezekiel 37, the famous vision of the valley of dry bones. Most preachers use it as a general illustration of spiritual resurrection, but the text, in its context, is specific. Ezekiel is speaking of the northern kingdom, and God tells him something extraordinary in verse 16 of the same chapter. Son of man, Take now one stick and write upon it for Judah and for the children of Israel his companions. Then take another stick and write upon it for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and for all the house of Israel his companions, and join them one to another into one stick, that they may become one in your hand. 2 sticks, one for Judah, 2 tribes of the south, another for Joseph and Ephraim, 10 of the north. And God orders the prophet to join them in a single hand. Visual prophecy of the future reunification of all the tribes into one body. When is that fulfilled? Romans 11 verse 26 says, "And so all Israel shall be saved." Paul, writing to the Romans almost 700 years after the Assyrian deportation, is still speaking of all Israel as a pending promise. Not just Judah, all Israel. And before we move on, pay attention to something else. Solomon himself, at the dedication of the first temple, prayed specifically for the tribes that would be deported. 1 Kings 8, verses 46 through 50. Solomon asked that if the people were taken captive to the land of enemies, far or near, and they repented in the land of their enemies, God would hear their prayer from heaven and forgive them. Solomon was praying for the exile before the exile existed, and the prayer covered both the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. Daniel 2. In Daniel 9 verse 7, he says something chilling. "O Lord, righteousness belongs to you, but to us shame of face, as it is this day. To the men of Judah, to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and unto all Israel, those who are near and those who are far off, through all the countries to which you have driven them because of their unfaithfulness." Daniel is already praying in Babylonian exile, but he mentions all Israel, those who are near and those who are far off. Daniel knew the 10 tribes were still existing, dispersed in distant places. These are not casual mentions. It is the backbone of Hebrew prophecy. The entire Bible, from Moses to Revelation, assumes that the 12 tribes are one people, separated by geography but united by destiny. And here we reach the point that strikes the hardest, something Jesus said that almost no one connects to this. Matthew 15 verse 24. A Canaanite woman asks Jesus to heal her daughter. Jesus at first does not answer. Then he says something harsh. "I am not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." Stop on that phrase. In Greek, ta probata ta apololota oiko Israel. The word apololota means literally those that have strayed, those that are scattered. Jesus was not speaking only of the Jews of Galilee. He was openly recognizing that there exists a house of Israel that is lost. And that part of his mission was to seek it. Matthew 10 verse 6, where Jesus sends out his 12 apostles, says exactly the same thing, but rather, go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. 12 apostles, 12 tribes. The symmetry is not accidental. And look what happens next. According to the oldest Christian traditions, recorded by Eusebius of Caesarea in the 4th century and by earlier Syriac writers, the apostles went specifically to regions where there were traces of the scattered tribes. Thomas went to Parthia, modern-day Persia, and according to the tradition of the St. Thomas Christians of southern India, he reached Kerala in the year 52. Matthew, according to Eusebius, went to Ethiopia. Bartholomew went to Armenia and parts of India. Andrew went to Scythia, the modern-day region of the Black Sea and the Caucasus. Philip preached in Phrygia, in modern-day Turkey, part of the ancient Assyrian territory. Look at the map. Parthia, Persia, India, Ethiopia, Armenia, Caucasus, Phrygia. Each apostolic destination matches a region where history documents the presence of earlier Hebrew communities. Thomas did not go to Kerala by chance. When he arrived at the port of Muziris in southern India, there already existed a community of Jewish traders called the Cochin Jews, established centuries before. According to tradition, Thomas first preached to that Hebrew community, and from there, the message spread to the local Indian population. The apostles were not religious tourists. They were following the trail of the scattered tribes, and Jesus sent them on that trail on purpose. And look at this. There is a letter in the New Testament that almost no one reads with this key. The letter of James, in Greek Iakobos, which means Jacob. The very first verse of the first chapter says something extraordinary. James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad, greetings. Read it again. To the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad. In Greek, ente diaspora. James, the brother of Jesus, writing from Jerusalem in the middle of the 1st century, is addressing his letter not to the Jews nor to the Christians, but specifically to the 12 scattered tribes. The 12, not the 2, not the 10, the 12. For James, in full apostolic time, the 12 tribes were still existing as an identifiable group scattered throughout the world. That letter is direct apostolic proof that the tribes were still alive in the 1st century. But there is one more detail, and it is one that almost no preacher connects. Look at the Greek verb James uses, tais ente diaspora, those in the dispersion, the definite article, the not some tribes, the 12, known, locatable, recipients of correspondence. How would a letter like that reach the 12 scattered tribes through the trade networks of the 1st century, the Mediterranean trade routes, the Parthian Empire, Egypt, Ethiopia, Persia? Each Israelite community had contact even distant with the others, and the apostles used those networks to distribute the letters. There are records in 2nd century Christian writings that mention communities in North Africa, in Mesopotamia, in Persia that preserved specific tribal traditions. Eusebius of Caesarea, in his ecclesiastical history of the 4th century, mentions Hebraic churches in regions of the ancient Assyrian Empire, communities that identified themselves not as Jewish, but as Israelite, terminology that suggests descent from the northern tribes, not from the southern kingdom. And there is one more thing, the parable of the lost sheep in Luke 15. Jesus tells the story of the shepherd who has 100 sheep, loses one, leaves the 99, and goes to look for that one. The traditional church reads it as a metaphor of the individual sinner, and that is fine. But there is a deeper layer. In the context of Matthew 15, where Jesus says the lost sheep of the house of Israel, that parable takes on another dimension. The lost sheep is not only the sinner, it is also the scattered tribe. It is Israel itself, waiting for the shepherd to find it. Jesus did not use words at random. When he said lost, strayed, scattered, he was activating deep prophetic memories in his Hebrew listeners. And now comes the final detail, the one I promised you at the beginning. In the year 1165 of our era, a Sephardic rabbi named Benjamin of Tudela undertook an extraordinary journey. He left Spain and traveled the entire known world looking for Jewish communities. He reached Baghdad, Persia, the Caspian, and in his diaries, he wrote something that for centuries was ignored by historians. He wrote that in the mountains behind the river Gozan, he found entire communities of Jews who said they descended directly from the tribes of Dan, Zebulun, Asher, and Naphtali, and that those communities were still speaking an archaic version of Hebrew, with customs that European rabbis no longer recognized. This testimony is documented, it is published, and it exists in several medieval manuscripts. It is not legend, it is a historical witness 860 years ago saying that he saw with his own eyes descendants of the northern tribes still living near the river Gozan, exactly where 2 Kings 17 verse 6 said the Assyrians had left them, and Benjamin was not alone. 70 years later, another Jewish traveler named Petahia of Regensburg also traveled through the area and reported the same thing. He described entire villages where men did not shave their beards, women wore long veils, and they kept the Sabbath with a strictness no European rabbi remembered. And there is a name that appears in many of those medieval accounts: the river Sambation. Rabbinic legend said that the 10 tribes lived beyond the river Sambation, a mysterious river that rested on the Sabbath and threw stones the rest of the days. For centuries it was thought to be pure legend. But modern researchers believe Sambation was a rabbinic code for indicating inaccessible regions of the East, possibly referencing the rapids of the Kabur River in certain seasons, or the Caucasus mountain ranges, or the Pamir Mountains. The legend hid real geographic data in coded language to protect the communities from persecution. There is more. In the 13th century, the Italian traveler Marco Polo, crossing Central Asia, noted the presence of Christian communities with Israelite names in Tibet and in China. He called them Nestorians. But some modern historians believe that part of those communities were distant descendants of the exiled tribes, converted to Nestorian Christianity by Syriac missionaries in the 4th and 5th centuries. And in the 21st century, several genetic investigations on populations of eastern Anatolia, the Caucasus, and eastern Turkey have found ancient Semitic traces in remote villages. The villages today are Muslim or Assyrian Christian, but the genetic heritage suggests ancient Semitic population. Researchers are cautious and do not categorically claim a connection with the tribes, but the data remain as solid evidence in the field. Imagine what that means. Almost 1,400 years after the deportation, there were still living traces in the exact place the Bible mentions, and no one in the West wanted to hear the testimony because they had already decided that those tribes had been lost. That is the real mystery. It is not that the tribes disappeared. It is that the world decided to forget them. The Bible, however, did not forget them. Every major prophet mentions them. Every psalm of exile weeps for them. Every messianic promise includes them. You, listening to me now, whatever your country, whatever your last name, whatever your appearance, you could carry a drop of that blood. You could be the descendant of one of those exiles who crossed the Haber River in the year 722 before Christ. A grandmother 10 generations back. A migration through the Silk Road. A European port in the 15th century. And from there to America, you cannot prove it case by case, but statistically, the genetic markers of the ancient Middle East are present in billions of people on the planet today. The seed of Abraham did not evaporate. It is breathing, it is walking, it is listening to this video maybe right now. What you were taught in Sunday school was not wrong, it was incomplete. And understanding this subject changes the way you read half the Bible, because when you see the word Israel in the prophets, you no longer confuse it with modern Jew. Israel is bigger. Israel includes the 10. Israel includes the scattered seeds. And that leads to the closing. Romans 11 verse 26, and so all Israel shall be saved. Paul, writing to the Romans almost 700 years after the Assyrian deportation, still speaking in the future. All Israel being the promise still pending. Not only Judah, not only Benjamin, all 12 tribes scattered on 4 continents for 2,748 years, waiting for a gathering that the Bible announces from Deuteronomy to Revelation. Revelation 7 verses 4 through 8 confirms it. John has a vision, and in that vision he sees sealed 144,000 from all the tribes of the children of Israel. And then he lists the 12 by name. For John, in the last prophetic book of the Bible, the 12 tribes appear as an identifiable, sealed, counted group, present at the end of times, 12,000 sealed from each tribe, 12 by 12,000, 144,000, all Israel already gathered in the final great prophetic scene. The tribes are not lost. They are waiting for a gathering that began decades ago with the Beta Israel, the Bnei Menashe, the lemba recognized, waiting for the banner to be raised in full and reunite what the Assyrian Empire dispersed 2,748 years ago. If something from this video reached you, send it to someone who needs to hear it. To that person who always asks you about biblical prophecy, or to the one who thinks they know everything about the Old Testament and never had this explained. Small actions like that are what grow real biblical knowledge. And if you made it this far, you already know what it means. You are part of the group that truly learns. And for you, one last thing. The day the tribes return will not be only a geographic event, it will be a spiritual event. Romans 11 says that the hardening of the chosen people was temporary until the fullness of the Gentiles came in. And after that, all Israel will be saved. The cycle closes. The promise God made to Abraham in Genesis 12 verse 3 is fulfilled in full. In you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. All the families of the earth. 12 tribes scattered on 4 continents speaking different languages, forgotten by the world, but never forgotten by their Creator. That is what changes forever the way you understand the Old Testament.